All ready? Welcome, everyone, to the November 13th City Council work session. We welcome everyone at home and here. This is our first meeting in Harris Hall, so there might be some little kinks to be worked out along the way of adjusting to our new circumstances, but we're very glad to be here and to have this opportunity. So I should say up front that Councilor Clark is not going to be with us at this evening, but we expect everybody else to be here. And the topic tonight is a very important one to all of us. It's the Opportunity Eugene discussion follow-up. I know Michael's going to introduce our guests here, but we do have a panel of service provider experts who are going to be able to share, so it can help us with our thinking. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, and it's interesting being in a new place, and maybe Councilor Farr, this is actually your first meeting in this Harris Hall, but it's under a different hat right now, right?
Here.
Harder to hear, or is it?
Okay, closer.
Okay.
So, got it. First kink. Thank you.
So, Mayor, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Michael and have him introduce the panel and talk a little bit about where we're headed tonight.
Okay. And before you start, Mike, I'm just going to remind everybody around the table that your mic is on all the time. So just so that you're aware of that, or you can push the oval button if you have a sidebar, some comment you want to make that you don't want everybody to hear. Okay. Ready to go. Michael.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. In continuation of our talks about homelessness strategies, tonight we bring forward a panel of homeless service providers to address some issues related to homelessness. Over our last few meetings, we've developed site criteria and reviewed potential sites for a homeless encampment. In addition to this, we've discussed winter strategies for this coming season. Staff continues to work on a site risk and regulatory analysis. Our preliminary work will be available to Council in this week's packet. We're also working to bring together a work session to discuss these topics along with funding strategies for winter strategies. Tonight, we've brought together a panel of service providers to assist in our continued discussions. Our panelists are well known in Eugene for the depth and caliber of services their agencies provide. I'm happy to introduce Terry McDonald, Executive Director of St. Vincent de Paul of Lane County, Thomas Mulhern, Executive Director of Catholic Community Services of Lane County, Susan Ban, Executive Director of Shelter Care, and Dan Bryant, Senior Minister of First Christian Church and President of the Opportunity Village Eugene Board. Our goal is to hear from our panel on two topics. The first question would be, in your current work and capacity, what of existing programs or additional strategies do you feel most effective for this upcoming winter? The second would be, what considerations would you put before Council as they continue to explore proposals for a homeless camp? We will discuss each question individually, beginning the discussion with our panel, and then open each question up to Council. So to dive right in, our first question for the panel. In your current working capacity, what expansion of existing programs or additional strategies do you feel most effective for this upcoming winter?
Let's start with Susan.
We'll start down here.
Start with me.
I
was hoping we'd start in the other way. Okay. All right. So if one considers that any kind of immediate expansion should be providing more services for more households that are immediately homeless or homeless right now, and should be something that could be happening right away and doesn't take an awful lot of infrastructure to build, the sort of strategies that I would recommend would be several of the strategies that are already in the recommendations: expansion of availability of the day access centers, the concept of the lockers, but also, so here Tom and I both serve families with children who are homeless, and that system has eroded significantly over the last couple of years because of change in federal dollar priorities. So just a few years ago, we had more than 30 units in the community. Tom's organization did some, and ours did others. Today, our agency, I think, has the only existing shelter units for families with kids. We're down to 10, and 6 of those are reserved for Springfield families only because of the way the funding cycle went through the HUD continuum of care. So if we could add additional units right now, we would be able to serve a wider diversity of people from Eugene and Lane County, as well as folks from Springfield, and we'd be able to move people into units more quickly and on. And the families come into those units having already been served at St. Vincent de Paul in the Interfaith Emergency Shelter System or at the Mission. So what we really are providing is that another 2 months of transitional support, hopefully then to be able to move people into affordable housing or into a transitional case management type of program. So we aren't anywhere close to meeting the need for families with kids in this community. There was anecdotally, I went back and looked at just 2 years ago, we had a centralized waiting list when families called that waiting list, and we had over 20-some units available for families at that time. Families would still wait 2 to 3 months for an available unit, and we were serving maybe 25% of the folks who were calling for services. So the demand hasn't diminished in the last 2 or 3 years. I can guarantee you that there are more families hurting because of the economic realities, but in the same time, our emergency shelter resources at a third. The other thing we can do right away is expand homelessness prevention activities, which are like rapid rehousing activities, and that's for folks who are not necessarily chronically homeless, that they are maybe more situationally homeless. They have resources to maintain stability in their housing because of a disruption in their lives. It may have been a lost job, may have been a medical emergency, may have been the landlord kicking up the rent past what they can afford. They're facing a housing crisis. And if we can provide support, and again, Catholic Community Services does this as well as shelter care, and I think St. Vinny's does some too, but if you can help people up front with getting into housing with those deposits and first month's rent, or helping them deal with their landlord and pay the rent or negotiate with the landlord, we were able to serve an awful lot of families that way. We served 215 families with that service last year, over 600 kids, and the outcomes are superb. Folks do remain in housing. Kids don't become homeless. Kids continue to go to school with a roof over their heads, and the community is better off for that. So those are the 2 ideas I would suggest.
So let me first wear my hat as the minister of a downtown church and the services that we provide. Not all may be aware of those, so I'll just briefly go over those. We have had a clothing ministry since the 50s that provides free clothing to people a couple hours a week, 4 hours a week. When the interfaith emergency shelter system began 22 years ago, I'm looking at Terry, I think it was, run by St. Vincent's. We were part of that system from the beginning. We now house those families for the last 3 weeks at the end of the school year. When we do our turn at that. When it became legal to camp in Eugene, we were one of the first to open up our parking lot for that. And because we own 2 lots, we actually have 2 different sites for that. So currently we have 4 campers. We've helped over 100 different individuals in the time since that was started. And that's one of the areas that I see as a huge need is expanding that, because of the number of people who come to us on a regular basis, weekly, asking if they can camp. I had a young man this morning who came into my office, wanted to set up his tent in our yard, and then unfortunately that was on the side of the alley where we already have 3, and I told him he could not do that. But later I learned he found another place where he was able to, but still that's a huge need. When the Egan Warming Center opened up, we became this downtown site for the Egan Warming Center, and we experienced, I think the largest number we had in our building was over 90, and it was too many. We were not, that was pushing our limit and just being able to handle it. And that's when you begin to have problems, when it gets overcrowded and, nerves get to people and what have you. Terry and I have been discussing this with Great League. We're very concerned that that system is going to be overrun this winter because we know the mission is already full. There just isn't space for individuals. And we're expecting to see excess numbers from day one when we open, but I'll let Terry speak more to that. But that very concerns me because we're the central site that everyone comes to. And if we are full, we'll be the place where we say no. And I don't know what we will do if we have to do that. And it's below 30 degrees. We have what we call our Good Samaritan ministry that's just a walk-in ministry that we began almost 10 years ago, where people just walk in unannounced, and we try to assist them in any way that we can, and we have a number of trained volunteers to help with that. And one of the big needs that we see in that is a place to store your belongings, and we frequently do that. We have to limit it because we don't have the space, and so again the proposal for a storage facility of some kind that would allow people to store their things so that they can go about their business is a huge need and would be a great help. So all of these combined, and the last one that we just started 2 years ago is a free breakfast on Sunday morning. And when we started it, we served 75 people. We are now serving over 250 people every Sunday morning. And mind you, this is a congregation with about 250 members. I mean, we literally serve more people each week than we have in the congregation. And we are blessed when we started that on a monthly basis and then went bi-monthly, and then several other congregations through the Oregon Faith Roundtable Against Hunger joined with us, so that now we have 5 or 6 different congregations assisting in that effort so that we can do it weekly. Otherwise, I think it would be beyond our capacity. But we have seen just in the last 6 months a dramatic increase in that group on Sunday morning, where we're now regularly hitting over 250, whereas before it was in just below 200. So providing for anything that will assist people in any of these situations would be a huge benefit, but particularly that storage, my concern about the Egan Warming Center capacity, and for other individuals for whom there are no other options out there. But I'll wear the other hat later this evening when we talk about the Opportunity Village proposal.
Well, the good news about difficult times is that it also has brought a lot of the service providers together in a way that we are not used to working quite as closely. And so one of the blessings out of all of this is that I get to see you guys a lot more, all of you. And in those discussions, there's a couple of things that we're learning about this winter coming up. One is that as a result of Jack Tripp and the mission working so closely with us, we're getting a better profile of how many people are out there. And as I think has been anecdotally said, and Jack, if you were here, would say the same thing, the mission really is at about capacity. They're going to be adding about 60 beds in the end of January if he's lucky. And that would be for women and children. But he can't get it done much before then. And his facility really needs to be a clean and sober space because he has so many people that are in recovery. And so that's one of the reasons why the Egan Warming Centers especially has been one of the things that's been a real concern to him. And it's concerned to us also. We also recognize that even though the mission, which is typically not full at this time of the year, it generally starts filling up when it gets a little colder than this, has been at full capacity since this summer. And so the result of that is that Jack and I have been taking a look through our facilities and seeing, well, how many people are still out on the camps. Because normally what you would think is that the camps would empty out if there are that many people in the mission. We've neither one of us seen the camps so full. Those are the illegal camps generally along the river that I'm sure the public safety has some interest in. So if there's a winter emergency where you have multiple days of very cold weather, we are concerned that the numbers which we would normally see at Egan, which is somewhere between 200 and 300, I think that's about the normal numbers that we see in the 4 sites, probably will be up by a third to a half. And we're going to simply run out of space. Well, what are we doing about it? The first thing that we're working on is that by the 15th of this month, we will have increased the day services space at the Lindholm Center by about 50%. That's just simply to make sure that we have places for people to come in and keep warm and have some modicum of opportunity for shower and laundry and the food service. That's large. We'd hoped we would be able to use the public funds that we got through the CDBG process, but unfortunately, as with all things that are associated with the federal government, it takes a while to get those funds on the street. So we're reserving those funds that were allocated for us for further expansion in the spring. But for this winter, that's what we're able to do at Lindholm. Because of the funds that you provided us last January, we've been able to continue to expand the car camping program, and we're aggressively pushing it, increased spaces for car camping. Most recently, we're working with the county, the Parks Department, to expand that program out into county parks, because there are some folks that have the capacity to be kind of permanent camp hosts, and that seems to be a strategy that will work for us, and so that will give us more capacity to put more people out there, which we're really grateful for, and that's actually as a result of some of the contacts through the old the Homeless Action Coalition, for those that remember 20-odd years ago. We've also been laying in more supplies. We purchased a large tent from the Federal Surplus Warehouse. We're laying in supplies of new underwear and socks and blankets and bedrolls because we anticipate that we'll hit this winter and we just simply won't have the capacity, so we're going to have some more supplies to keep people warm and dry to the best of our ability. The first place, Family Center, we increased the number of dryers so that we'd be able to put through more product at both there and at Lindholm Center on 99, so that we would have more capacity to put laundry through for folks, because of course one of the problems in the wintertime is that you can't keep yourself dry and clean. And so that's something we've been able to add also this year. The ability to store product on the street was one of the recommendations that came out of the spring effort. That has not happened. That will be a continuing problem as we move forward if there's extra capacity, because one of the problems of being homeless on the street is that if you don't have a place to store your own personal goods that you live on, that means you have to carry them all the time. If it's wet and rainy out, that means they get wet, and it's difficult for people to navigate that. I mean, folks on the street are pretty clever, but it is hard to navigate that. It would be very nice to have some way to store personal items in a way that was secure and distributed throughout the community in a way that was realistic. That's something that could, I think, happen relatively quickly. Protein items are increasingly a problem as we move into this season. As those of us who have followed, Pat's, I know, followed this for many years at Food for Lane County, the amount of protein in food boxes is diminishing. It's because of the old federal surplus programs are really gone now. And so as a result of that, the amount of protein, which is critical in the wintertime, those seem to be falling off. And so we're trying to lay in some protein ourselves at this time, coupling it with the Christmas food box program that we always have. So we're trying to lay some extra supplies in so if it gets tough, we'll have something to fall back on. The real concern for us is obviously the excess capacity that we used to have, the little bit of wiggle room we used to have with Tom's programs or Susan's programs out at Shelter Care. Those are pretty much gone. And then coupled with the unfortunate funding issues associated with detox, which thank God Peace Health stepped forward and helped us, and I think that gets us through until May, if I'm not mistaken, or no, March. I guess it's March that we'll get through to. That will help with some of the most difficult of the folks on the street. But we really have no middle tier services for dual diagnosed folks on the streets. If they're veterans, we have the Vet Lift program, which continues to expand. We're able to offer more services there in the last 12 months. But our concern really this winter is if there's going to be a serious winter emergency, where are we going to put the extra people?
Well, I got to say ditto to what the three previous folks have said, and they certainly have a lot more years of experience here in this community than I do. I've been here a little over a year. But certainly it's striking to me the level of need and the situation going into this winter, and really appreciate your willingness to sit down like this and to consider ways to try to be prepared to respond to what seems like a fairly challenging situation. In terms of Catholic Community Services, we work really closely with the other organizations here and others in the community. And as Terry said, that's we do that anyway, but you're forced to do that even more so when times are tight like they are now. I would echo particularly what Susan said about shelter, immediate shelter for families, and would add to that shelter for people who are medically fragile and are therefore unable to stay at the Eugene Mission because of their medical condition. And the way we are trying to address that is with a very recent development of using hotel stays, short hotel stays, to get people in right away, so they don't have to wait 2 months to get into one of the shelter apartments that are no longer available because they've been defunded. And it's helpful. Obviously, it's a Band-Aid, but it's an important Band-Aid for somebody who's in a health crisis and is homeless and needs a place to go, or a family that's in transition. And it's also a good gap-filling kind of thing. Just today, there was a homeless veteran from one of Terry's programs that they were working with who had this stopgap, needed a place to stay for a few nights, and then so we've got him in a hotel tonight for the next 3 nights, and then he's on to the next stage of a place to stay, a more permanent place to stay. So that shelter for families is important. As Susan said, the rapid rehousing, the having funds to help people when you're working with them, pay those deposits. So many times that's the real barrier, is that they're in a position where they're making some money, they've got some prospects, but they're not able to save enough to make the deposit for the first month's rent. So when we can do that, it really makes a difference for a lot of people. And then the third thing would be echo this thought about storage place for places for homeless people to store their things. And I think our place on West 6th would be a pretty good location for a place to, not the only place certainly, but a place where we could add that kind of capacity if we had the resources to put in the appropriate kinds of equipment or facilities. And we're not even sure what that is, but we're happy to work with other people to figure that out.
Now we could take any questions from council to the panelists related to this question of expanding existing capacity.
So I'll start that off. Thank you all very much for your comments and for the work that you do for our community. It really matters a lot, and we really appreciate everything that you do. And yep, I will lean in. Sorry. The question I wanted to ask Susan is, do you see any prospects of adding more capacity to your unit, replacing some of your lost units in the near future?
Yes, we're working on it, and we have committed to add additional units, I think another 2 at Family Housing Program, and then hopefully in the new year would be looking, and this is all private fundraising, so our goal is to raise another $50,000 to open 2 additional units. So that's our goal. And then we've got units that we can make emergency shelter units, so if there were additional support, we could do that as well. I will say, I think, around that, Mayor, the feds are clearly moving out of the emergency shelter picture, and I think a continuum of care, and I think everybody here at the table would agree with me, is you do need to have some emergency capacity. Yes, granted, prevention and rapid rehousing are wonderful strategies, permanent housing is great, but there are always families with kids on the street, and we don't want those kids on the street. We'll be losing within the next several years the units in Springfield because we'll be developing new housing there when that old L building goes down. So I think long-term for this community, I would encourage us to look at the units at Family Housing Program and really try and prioritize those as emergency shelter units for families with kids, because they're gone. I mean, CCS is now using vouchers, and Springfield will go away, and that will be all that's left. And I do think we're going to need that as a strategy for the long term.
Thank you for that. The other question I actually had from Michael, and might inform you, is did you get a chance to go look at the storage facilities over on 2nd yet?
No, I have not.
I mentioned those before, and I'll mention them again because I go by them a lot, and they're storage units that are on 2nd and Polk, and they're kind of interesting to me. It seems like they're heavily used right now by folks in the mission, and they share those facilities. They even out in front have like coffee and pop machines and and there's a toilet facility in there. So I'm just I don't know. It may have some downsides. I don't know that. I'm just saying it looks to me like it has a lot of the things that you're already thinking about, and if they're doing it, and that certainly is being done by a private entity, and so it might be worth taking a look at to see what's working and what's not working in that. And I know they close it up at night, so it's shut down at night, but it's open during the day, and you see people sort of somewhere between keeping their things there, meeting their friends there, handling their lives through the use of those facilities. So it continues to strike me as maybe having something in it that's an option for us to be thinking about replicating in other places. Dan?
Just stated that, and I assume that they're paying rent for that, and so that's why that works. What I experience in our place, the people that come to us and ask us, can you keep this for me, for the day? Sometimes it's for the week. We've even had a time or two where someone's headed off to jail, and they want to keep their stuff. And these won't work in all these situations, but what I experience is people coming into the downtown area, especially for whatever reason, for the services that they are seeking, or because they're going to get on the bus or what have you, and don't have any money or very little money. And so having some kind of locker that is available to them if someone provides them a lock if they don't have their own, and that's part of the details we'll have to work out, will be just hugely beneficial for that segment of folk. And the other thing is we have a lot of people that come to our clothing ministry seeking blankets and coats and backpacks because their stuff was stolen last night. I can't tell you how many times that happens. And so having something where they can lock it up to cut down on that kind of thing would be a huge benefit.
But having said that, I fully agree with you. Anytime that we can enlist the private sector's opportunities, it's well worth exploring. So.
It sort of looks to me, and I'm only saying it looks to me because I don't have enough information, it really looks to me like you have lots of people with a little bit about their being able to utilize that. So just thinking about that in terms of what people can do. The other thing that comes to my mind is I know when I was over at one of the Egan evenings, I was approached by folks who said, I get my SSI money, but I don't get enough of it that it gets me into anything. And so we haven't really talked about this, but the other issue for me is, do we have somebody who works on how people can put resources together that might get somebody into a place that they couldn't get into by themselves?
Yeah, we've got transitional housing programs where we work with people to do that, to put their money together in order to be able to.
So they actually do that?
But there are not enough of them, though. That's the problem, is that you're limited by your professional staff to be able to work with folks.
But adding to your comment, which is they have got their SSI, it's going to be a fixed income, it's going to be there long term. That means that you have to have housing available for very low-income individuals and families. That's the kind of SRO housing that hasn't been built since we did Mary Skinner in this community, and that's almost 20 years ago. And so that kind of, small, quad, quint, small unit development is one of the things that would help take some of the stress off that particular population. But as I say, that kind of housing hasn't been developed in 20 years. I think that's the last time that we had that kind of open, Section 42 tax credit deal that was targeted specifically for that very low-income population.
Others? Yes, of course.
I really appreciate all the work that the providers have been doing to work on this issue. I know it's a very difficult one, and we're having to think both short-term and long-term. And there's a number of proposals that have a longer-term window on them that we're going to talk about. But I know that part of the pressure we've been feeling is cold weather is coming, and what is the options right now? And I appreciate you talking in very real terms about what we can do in the short term immediately. And so I know we've talked about some of the things that can be done right away in terms of increased camping, mission capacity, providing some additional people who can provide some additional support. I think it would be helpful if you could just very briefly maybe help the council with just some of the ideas for kind of triaging. What is that immediate stuff you can do to accommodate as many people as possible right now within the capacity you're talking about? I know we've talked about some different kinds of options.
Well, beefing up, working on getting more spaces with the county. When Pat switches hats, we'll be tapping him to see if he can work with his parties to get things going a little bit faster out there. But clearly, that's an easy one because it doesn't require anything more than what we currently have. The people come with their own, vehicle or whatever they have. The county provides the electric and the water and the sewer. And so, that's one that's a benefit for them and a benefit for us. And any way to beef that up intergovernmentally would be a wise thing to push for because it has an immediate ramification of freeing up spots for those people that have proved themselves reliable inside of the car camping program here and frees that spots up for the next folks coming through. So that's pretty straightforward and pretty quick. There has been a great deal of discussion about this winter. And the great deal of discussion is, we've bribed Dan by getting him a new floor to try and give us much capacity at First Christian. We've beefed up the number of people that are going through the trainings for Egan. And we have enough faith communities to handle a traditional year, which is, again, that 200 to 350 people, well, 200 to 300 realistically for a winter emergency. Anything above that, we really need help finding a place. I think we could staff it. I think we could staff it with the volunteers that we have in place, at least for up to 3 to 5 days. But what we don't have is we don't have a place. And there's only so many faith communities out there that have the capacity to take this kind of a program on. We've been very blessed in this community to have a number of those faith communities that were willing to do that. But I'm kind of running. I'm wearing out my welcome in a lot of places, and so finding a physical structure or a sheltered area where we can put people in, if we have to. Would be a piece of capacity that would make us all sleep a lot better.
Probably what I would do is maybe ask each one of you to tell us on the council in the short term for this winter if you could have your recommendation for what you think would be the best way to accommodate as many people as possible, not everybody, but as many as you could. And you said, this is what I need from you. What would it be?
It's a complex question in a sense, Chris, because we're talking about different populations here. Right. And when we're talking about the Egan Warming Center, we're talking about a continuum of care that really is dealing with chronically homeless. It's a problem that's really hard. And what we're doing already in our shop, because we work with a lot of those coming through the Safe Haven program and the Inside program, is trying to triage, tighten up, move people through faster, and then use the vouchers. The other option for folks who are in that situation are the Shelter Plus Care vouchers, where it's 30% of their income toward rent, and if they have zero income, it's zero rent kind of thing. So there's nothing you all could do around that, but we are working really hard to move people through that system more quickly, get people into housing more quickly so that we can ultimately be serving more people. What we can do right away is add emergency shelter units for families with kids. And that's a different population. Families with kids are not typically the chronically homeless. Some of them are, but we're also talking about folks who are situationally homeless. And if we can address it right away, either by preventing their homelessness or getting them rapidly into a permanent housing situation, or for families who've been in the homeless systems for a while, getting them into a shelter unit and supporting them from that. That's easy. We can put those on. Homelessness prevention dollars are very easy. You don't have to, typically you don't need to staff up. You just have more money to disperse to the 75% of the folks you're not able to serve today because you don't have enough dollars. So, yeah. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, from what you work with, that's a great answer. So I'd be curious to know what would be the same kind of answer from each one.
You know, my personal hope would be, first of all, that when a family comes to any one of these programs, we don't have to put them on a waiting list. And to have something. And actually, when we started the Interfaith Emergency Shelter System, that was its intent. It was supposed to be it was the front porch of our shelter system. It was where we were going to hold families so that we didn't have to put them on a waiting list. Now we have a waiting list to get into the porch. Mm-hmm. You know, and it's really a tragic situation. When I was talking to William Wise, Terry might be able to say more about this, the 19 or 20 families they had on their waiting list, when they had a spot open, they couldn't even find some of them because they don't have a telephone that works, or you know who knows what the situation is, and if you can't get in touch with them when you've got an open spot, and you know they're out there somewhere, who knows where. I mean, that's just a huge tragedy. But I want to speak to a second issue, and this really came home to me today when we had a wonderful delegation here for the last couple of days from Dignity Village and Right to Dream 2 in Portland. And one of the gentlemen, just very articulate, well-spoken, who told his story of how being a single man out there trying to get help and couldn't find any. It wasn't until he got arrested and got an addiction and got a mental health problem that he could finally get the help he needed. And it was that kind of thing, that there was help for someone in this situation, but not in that. And what we've discovered is that there's just, and I see this in my office, people who are fairly high functioning, they're just poor. They're just poor. And they don't have, and many times they've got a little bit of income, especially disability income, but it's not enough. And they can't pay a $400 rent on a $650 income. And then they get in trouble, and they get arrears in their rent, and then they get kicked out. In fact, I had one person who got red flagged in one of our shelter programs because he wasn't able to pay the rent in that program. Not in a shelter, but in a transitional program where he was expected to pay rent. And now his rent history is ruined. So finding those resources to help those people, and this is what we'll talk about later, who have the capacity to do things for themselves, but they just need a little bit of help, I think is going to be the next challenge for us once we get the families taken care of. So.
Yeah, and from our perspective, it would be similar to what Susan said. It would be emergency shelter for families and for the medically fragile folks. Again, filling in those gaps that aren't addressed by the Eugene Mission, because the Eugene Mission does an incredible service here in this community. The amount of beds and the care they're providing for so many people, but there are some gaps, and that's one of them is shelter for families with kids and for people who are medically fragile. And so that's where I would say for the most immediate assistance to people in need, where we would want to see the resources directed.
One more thing is the need for a wet bed facility, and I don't know, Terry, if you've said enough about that, but that's huge because the people out there that are dual diagnosis especially, that are constantly being picked up by the police, taken to an emergency room, cost us more than what it would cost if we had a wet bed facility. So that's your entry.
Well, I think Chris's request was for something immediate this year, so it's going to be a little hard to set up that kind of a facility. I did want to say that, adding capacity so we can do more triage would be really helpful. It's not like we can't find resources. St. Paul and all the agencies are pretty clever at coming up with, other people's money to spend. I pick as many pockets as I can get. But the truth is that if you just don't have the time and the staff to do it, you just can't get at it. And that would be a help.
So I'm conscious of the time and that we have a whole other discussion we want to have tonight. And I know Michael wanted to leave this discussion with some prioritization. Is that true, Michael, on the strategies for?
I feel we got a good list of what our service providers feel their priorities are for this season.
Want to hear from, we had 6 strategies that were proposed, and I thought in our discussion this afternoon that you were interested in whether council wanted to lift any of those up to the top of the list, or drop any off, or what you wanted to do with it. Yes.
Thank you, Mayor Piercy. There were a couple of recurrent themes among the 4 of you. The first one, obviously, was storage, which doesn't help people keep warm and dry, but it helps people to perhaps move forward with their life and get other things accomplished. So it seems, Michael, that we heard pretty loud and clear that storage, whether it be 7th and Polk or some other, or CCS or some other place, there may be some so-called low-hanging fruit available there to get something done right away. And second, everybody seemed to echo what Susan had regarding families with children and finding some way to expand the family shelter program in some way to add more people, so we don't have people waiting to get on the doorstep with somebody else's term. So to me, those are the 2 things that I heard pretty loud and clear.
You need to speak into...
Michael.
Michael, could you just please just reiterate the 6 proposals, and then we'll see what council wants to do with those.
Certainly.
Go ahead.
We had started with expansion of the car camping program, followed with rapid rehousing funding. Third was expanding the Looking Glass shelter for $17,000. Fourth was MASH-style tent. Fifth was locker expansion. And 6 was a additional triage person to help guide people to appropriate resources.
And that came with a $200,000 price.
The window was between $207,000 and $227,000.
Okay. So the question, having heard what you heard, is there any prioritization? Do you want them all to move forward, part of them to move forward? Is there a proposal that's coming from staff about the prioritization?
I think we could follow up with the proposal after meeting tonight with our service providers.
Okay, so you just like some time to, Sarah?
Our recommendation is going to be to follow what I've heard some say, which is we can identify the funding for some of the things that can be implemented most immediately, and that would include some of the rapid rehousing, the family units. We need to probably explore the cost of that a little bit more, and not immediately fund MASH-style tent or something where we're going to be spending a chunk of time doing very similar work to what we might be doing anyway around a village, which is finding a location for it. So it's a great idea, but we probably can't set it up next week, and so our recommendation would be that we narrow down to some things that we can start working on now, and then we can come back as the winter goes on, as we explore more.
Okay, I'm Claire, and then Alan.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation, for being here. Sorry I was a little bit late. I think that sounds fine to me in terms of what staff is suggesting. I think the other thing we heard, which I don't know if there's a cost to the city associated with this, but trying to work with the county to implement the Camp Host program more rapidly and get some movement on that. So if there's some way we can facilitate that or make a request to the county around that, I think that would be really beneficial.
Could I speak to that very quickly? Remember that the predicate on that was is that if we had the ability to continue the funding from last year that came to us in January, then I would be able to not build down that program, but I would be able to then continue to expand. I can't do both at the same time. If the $50,000 goes away, I'm going to have to build down the sites that I've got rather than trying to expand.
That's good information.
Alan?
Yeah, sorry, I've lost my voice, so
really into it.
I'll try to be brief. I think that the high priority, I think all 6 of these are high priority, but I would focus on the ones that we can have the most immediate impact on first, the ones that we can implement the quickest, and also avoid bad outcomes from happening, like the camping sites going away. So those would be I don't know which ones those are, but those would be my highest priority within the 6, but I think we should implement all 6 of them.
Anybody else have anything they want to add to the discussion right now? Okay. One other thought that I had before we switch over to the next topic is in the recent Sandy hurricane thing, we had a company here from Eugene who is providing the emergency shelter for there, and I would just wanted to encourage us to bring them into this conversation. They are very creative and innovative and sort of top of the line, and perhaps they would have not only some thoughts about what they might offer to our need for shelter, but they might have some different ideas than we would typically think of.
We have one of their facilities currently. We just purchased it, and we're going through and kind of doing a listing out of the most appropriate things that would fit our needs as council or the county or the community decides to roll forward. So we are in the process of making sure that contact is there.
Great.
Mayor?
Yes.
I just want to make sure we
get closure.
have some closure. So what I'm understanding is the expectations will come back with what we've heard as the most immediately able to implement for this winter. So it could be things like car camping, the rapid rehousing, storage, for example. The price tag on those, I think, is plus or minus $100,000, not the full $200,000. And then the specific funding that would pay for those. And what we will do is initially, part of that will be coming back with what could be ongoing funding, because I think the need isn't going to stop with this winter. And so it's really an ongoing funding piece. And knowing that that's going to be also difficult to figure out, we'll also identify some one-time funding, knowing that if we choose one-time funding, it will get built into the gap that we'll deal with as part of the budget, which ultimately will be an ongoing funding conversation. So just to talk a little bit about that. But so what we'd come back with is that kind of information for council to take action on. Is that what the expectation is?
George?
Well, yeah, I'd just like to add, I mean, those are all good things and necessary things, but I keep going back to this figure, Egan Warming Centers there'll be an extra 100 or 150 people, according to Terry's prediction this year, so we really need to figure out what to do about that. First of all, find a place. That seems to be the most critical. People can be trained. We need to find a place, see if it has to be rented. I mean, I don't know. But I think that should be specifically on that list.
Anybody else? John, done enough for right now?
No, that's fine, and we'll want to come back soon for you to take action on those. So.
Yeah, we had a conversation earlier today about that. That is my most fervent thing, is that you help and we all don't let go of this until we get it figured out, because winter is upon us, and so we need to move. We need to move rapidly on this, and that may mean that you have additional meetings, like one closer to Thanksgiving than you wish we'd have one, perhaps, because we need to get this work done, and it's important. And I suppose I would add, before we switch to the next topic, that if you think about the season we're heading into, there's no more appropriate topic we could be dealing with at this time. So let's move on to the second area.
The second topic for our panel, starting with Tom this time, would be, what considerations would you put before council as they continue to explore proposals for a homeless camp?
Well, first, I would say that anything that provides more places for homeless people to live in a safe environment is a good thing, based on what we've been saying all evening here already. So I'm certainly supportive of the idea of anything that's going to do that. Obviously, there are a lot of challenges associated with starting camp, and the consideration that I'm sure you'll hear from others as well is not to do it at the expense of existing programs and services. I think that point's been well made, and I don't think there's any objection to that, but it's just, this would be an addition to the service network rather than a substitution at best. So That's enough for me.
I guess I would just like to say to you guys before the rest of you speak is that nobody wants to put you on the spot here. Yes, no, thumbs up, thumbs down, whatever. We're just asking for your best thoughts about the idea of citing a camp to help with some gaps that we have. And so answer it in any way that you feel comfortable with. And go ahead, Terry.
Well, I've always been rather blunt, so
Yes.
I think I'll...
I'm not worried about you.
Yeah, we'll come to the chase. The council and the city over the last 20 years has funded some pretty innovative programs, if you think about it. The car camping program, when it began, was a serious risk, if you remember that back. The Egan Warming Centers, which you didn't fund, but the community came up with another seriously strange idea. The Interfaith Emergency Shelter System, Lindholm Center on 99. Council has put their foot out there a few times over the last several generations and done some pretty good stuff, and what probably looked like it was pretty goofy going in. But I think there's some common thread to the things that you have put forward. One, you have to have capacity on the service provider. If you're going to hire somebody to do a service for you that they have come up with or that they are thinking of coming up with, they have to have the capacity, and that means that you have to have the financial capacity, you have to have the staff capacity, or else some substitute for that staff capacity to make sure that whatever they promise, they'll be able to deliver. You have to have something that's insurable, because unfortunately, if you're going to use public lands, and if you're going to use a public space and lease it to a nonprofit or whoever you're going to lease it to, there's a flow-through liability for what's going to happen to that to the city. And after all, the city is a much deeper pocket than whatever service provider is going to be providing that service. One of the things that we've talked about consistently on this project, and I've shared with the committee, is you must have a way to make sure that the individuals or family units that are in this project have a secure way to keep themselves safe and their possessions safe, and that's a lockable door. One of the concerns that we've had over the last year on the tent camping, and one of the reasons why that has not expanded as we thought it would a year ago, is that people said, I can have a tent, but it's very easy to break into it and take whatever they want, and it's just not a secure place. I think if you're going to have any kind of transitional facility or place, you definitely have to have not only a secure parameter, which we've already talked about also, and is in the proposals we've seen come forward, but you obviously have to have a secure place for people to sleep and have their goods, and I think that's just a bottom line requirement for any successful program anywhere you go that's going to actually make a difference in people's life. You have to have a very clear idea of what the people are going, what the agency or group is proposing. I don't know about you. I don't know if you've gotten a copy of this other than this evening. This is much clearer and much better focused than I have seen coming out over the last several months. And it's helpful to me because now I can get my teeth in, as you are, into what's actually being proposed. Okay, and that is important because one of the concerns I've had all along on any proposal with this kind of a facility, which is a quasi-shelter, quasi-transitional housing program, is that how do you keep the people and the surrounding community safe? And I think that's one of the priorities of the council. Well, you do that by making sure that the ideas and the concepts are well played out and well laid out. Self-governance. Self-governance is a good thing if you can find a way to make sure that the self-governance goes in place. But for that, you need to have really strong community leadership that can be either driven through a very good, strong board that has good advisors and good support systems associated with it to make sure that it goes forward, so that if it is successful, great. If it is not successful, there's a responsible party that will take care of the issues for the city. So those things, I think, are just sine qua non. You've got to have those pieces in place. Otherwise, you've got too many questions that have not been answered. Now, having said that, I want to go back to the innovative part of this. None of us have a lot of resources. This program has indicated that they do not want to have city resources, they just want public land. I would have been a lot more comfortable if this proposal had come forward on private land. It has not. And I'm sure there's a variety of reasons for that. It would be one of my goals that if it is successful, that it does go toward private lands, even if it takes public funds to get it to private land. Because having it on public land, I think ultimately is going to be a situation that will lead at some point to a conflict with the city that I don't think is necessary. If this concept is indeed a good idea, and that we are, blessed by having another one of those innovations coming out of Eugene that is as a result of good-hearted people and good strategic planning and solid staff work or solid volunteer work, then I think we'll all be blessed with a new answer and a new quiver, a new arrow in the quiver. But I really think those pieces are very important.
Thank you, Terry.
We're going to skip Dan because he's going to speak on behalf of the board. So I guess for me, and I haven't read the most recent one, so I'm at a disadvantage, but I think the board needs to become clear about what their goal and purpose is, as simple as, is this transitional, is it permanent, is it a committed community where people are learning skills, in which case that really is a long-term commitment on the behalf of the participants, who's the target population to be served, and what are the characteristics of that. And then one of the things I'm very concerned about is that how does this new model of serving a homeless population then connect to the rest of us, so that I would want very much to be able to be confident that individuals identified in the Opportunity Village who would be perhaps appropriate for some of the services that we provide in terms of supportive housing to adults with mental illness, we'd have an opportunity to do a warm handoff. We'd have an opportunity to cultivate relationships and to help people move through this homeless experience and into kind of permanent housing and be able to then contribute back to the community. So I think that's it. There are models. There are some wonderful models nationally, and I guess I just want to make sure, too, in terms of governance and a lot of the things that Terry was mentioning, that we're making sure that we're looking for outcomes and that they're outcomes that can be measured and tested against some other kind of national models for programs like this.
It's dangerous to let the preacher have the last word. But I do want to begin with just a little word of inspiration. I had the opportunity last week to attend a breakfast from the Oregon Faith Roundtable Against Hunger in Portland, and Sylvia Hayes, First Lady of Oregon, was the speaker, and she shared her story of growing up in poverty, and it was just very moving and powerful. But in the course of it, she quoted Senator Robert F. Kennedy, a speech he gave the day after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. And I was so moved by it, I looked it up so that I could have a copy of the speech. It was a speech he gave at the City Club of Cleveland. And he spoke of another kind of violence besides the violence that takes the lives of people like Martin Luther King. And this is what he said. There's another kind of violence, slower but just as deadly, destructive as the shot or the bomb in the night. This is the violence of institutions, indifference and inaction and slow decay. This is the violence that afflicts the poor, that poisons relations between men and women because their skin has different colors. This is a slow destruction of a child by hunger, and schools without books, and homes without heat in the winter. And then he closed with these words, "Surely we can learn at least to look at those around us as fellow men and women. Surely we can begin to work a little harder to bind up the wounds among us and to become in our hearts brothers and sisters and countrymen once again." It's really in the spirit of what we're trying to do with Opportunity Village. And the first thing I want to say is strike the word camp from your lexicon. This is not a camp. Because it has that image of tents and tarps, and we want something that's safe and secure, that is lockable. And by the way, I've had conversations with both my colleagues here on either side, have presented to our board. We are working very collaborative with all the agencies, and we'll have continued conversations with others that we are shaping this in as we go, as we listen to the advice that we're getting from these good folk. But we want to create safe, secure, insulated, little micro houses, 150, 200 square feet, just essentially a large bedroom where you can store your stuff. And more importantly, but a community, that you're not by yourself. And so we have several people here today from Dignity Village and R2D2. Just wave your hand so folks see that you are. They came down to share with us their stories, and they've met with several of the counselors and the mayor, I understand. They have incredible stories of the difference it makes when you are given an opportunity and working together and what you can do to help yourself that it doesn't always take a professional, highly paid staff person, that sometimes the community, that the resources are already there within the community, and they are a living witness to what they have done to help each other. And I know there's a lot of skepticism about self-government, but they are a living witness to its effectiveness. What we are trying to do in Eugene is a little bit different. We've learned from their experience, and much of their wisdom is included in this document, but we are using an oversight of an independent nonprofit board that's been established that says these are the non-negotiables. Actually, they're non-negotiables that we learned from them, of things like no alcohol, no drugs, no violence, no theft, no disruption in the community. And other than those non-negotiables, how you organize your life together is up to the community itself. And so working with them to establish those relationships and establishing their council that helps provide that direction, that organizes their security. No one will be on site who is not approved. We know who is on site at all times. So it's very important that we maintain those secure borders, both for the security and safety, as well as the well-being of the community. And what you learn from these folk is that, first of all, that they improve their neighborhood. They clean it up. They take care of the problems in the immediate neighborhood. They chase out the drug dealers. They deal with the graffiti. They're something attractive. And you also learn that by helping each other, that they are creating a healthier community for all of us. And the great story that I didn't know until they came down, because I'd heard of R2D2, which stands for Right to Dream 2, we all have a right to sleep, and it's in our sleep that our dreams come. And if you have to wake every 20 minutes and be moved because you don't have a place to sleep, you never get to dream. So the Right to Dream 2 was established through the folk from Dignity Village who helped to organize it and got it going. And so here is the community reaching out and expanding the services to another community. It's just an incredibly powerful story. Well, we want to capture that spirit and bring it to Eugene to demonstrate to people that not all homeless are criminals, drug addicts, alcoholics, severely mentally ill. There are many folk out there on the street who are just poor. That's the only thing, that they don't have the means and just need a little bit of help. And if we give them that little bit of help, we can change not only their lives, we change this community. We create a model that can be duplicated across the nation, and the people will look to us the same way that they look to us for the organization building these shelters, or a program like Birth to Three, the Now Parenting Now, and so many programs in Eugene, the Oregon Bach Festival, that we have become known for. I truly think we have an opportunity here to create a model of which we can be proud, and we can show a different face to homelessness. That here are decent people that just need a chance, and when we give them a chance, they can rise and shine, and we will be proud. So, ready to answer your questions.
I appreciate the hands. Thank you so much. Michael, did you have something you wanted to add to this?
I'm ready for any council questions.
So I just want to start this out by saying that I really appreciate all the visitors that have come to our community, and some of them came to meet with me today. One of the things that's a little aside from the village concept that was really interesting to me was their place to sleep, and creating a safe place for people to sleep. Even in their case, it's 2 shifts a day, 12 hours a shift, 90 people per shift that can actually safely put their heads down and go to sleep and know that nothing's going to happen to them in the process. And as we were talking about earlier today, too, it's sort of remarkable to think that, I know that for you guys it's not remarkable at all, but it is remarkable for a lot of people to think about the fact that there are people that actually can't find a place to safely sleep, and certainly not for a full night, and certainly not go to sleep knowing they're going to be okay and know they're going to wake up being okay. And the safety and security of just knowing that is such a step up from where many people are. I think all of us who've spent our lives having shelter and knowing where the next meal's coming from and knowing that we are going to be able to, given that we don't have insomnia, we're going to be able to sleep well. I think it's hard for us to comprehend people who go through literally years of their lives without being able to rest. And resting is key, as any of us knows who's ever not slept or had a baby, that you can very, very quickly be at your wit's end when you don't get a basic and adequate sleep, and it can make you seem to be a person that you really are not, and that can happen to any of us. So I think this is an important conversation, and I'm actually pretty heartened by the numbers and amount of care and concern in the community. The challenge for us is to figure out what we want to do with the information we have and how we want to move forward on this. So if there are questions or comments you would like to make, now's the time to do it. I'm going to Chris, and then George, and then Claire.
I really appreciated the opportunity to meet with the Dignity Village folks and the R2D2 folks yesterday. And I think for me, it really re-emphasized the value of taking the time to do this right. I know there was a lot of frustration over the fact that we didn't seem to be acting fast enough. I think in the end, where we are today indicates to me that we have taken the time necessary to have the quality of conversation we're having right now. And I agree with Terry, this is a much more focused, much more understandable proposal than some of the things we've talked about before. Because what is Opportunity Village was just as much of a concern as when was Opportunity Village. Because for many people, Opportunity Village was simply Washington Jefferson version 2. And that scared a lot of people because they didn't want to create another tent camp someplace else. That's not in the best interest of the campers, and it's not in the best interest of Eugene. This is a much more solid proposal as a micro-housing project. And I agree with Terry, the notion of safe and secure includes safe and secure in your person and your possessions. And so I think that has to be a fundamental element, which it sounds like from talking to the Dignity Village folks, they have also confronted in a very big way and have figured out solutions to deal with that. So because we've taken this much time, I am a lot more comfortable now than I may have been even a few months back, as it kind of came in and out of focus as to what it was to be. The one element I would add, which is simply a cautionary note, it's not a prediction in any means, is one of Eugene's greatest strengths has been its distribution policy with regard to low-income individuals and homeless people. We have made it one of our cornerstones that we don't concentrate lots of individuals in one area, ghettoized, so to speak, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And I don't think that's the intent here. And one of the qualities I like about this is you're not trying to create a ghetto by crowding 200, 300 people in one place. I think the notion of making these of a more manageable size maintains the spirit of let's keep this not an eyesore. We don't want to create the projects. I grew up in New York. I remember the projects. We don't want to create the projects. We want to create something that has both opportunity and dignity in it as a concept. And I think scale becomes very critical from that standpoint. So I appreciate all the work that's been done on this, and it makes it much easier for me to not only understand it, but to see where it is you're trying to get to. And I think that is consistent where more so than maybe in the past with what we are trying to do as a city.
George?
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I didn't hear anybody say no. I didn't hear anybody on the panel say outright no, terrible idea, bad idea. There are questions, and we all have questions, and Terry McDonald listed a few things that I think are key also. One is, the provider has to deliver the service, the interface between the city and the parents and children. But the people at the camp will, let's remember, this self-governance model works very well. I've visited the 3 tent cities in Seattle and Dignity Village in Portland in June. They're very well run. As one of the gentlemen from Portland today said at an earlier meeting, we lost our houses, we haven't lost our minds. We can still function and make rational decisions and govern our lives in a sensible fashion. So that's one thing. I mean, the provider, the service has to be delivered. They have to be insured. They all are insured. All 5 of the existing camps are insured. They must be secure. They're very secure. There's a perimeter. There's a security booth right at the entrance. There's one entrance. This is one of the nice things about it. Not only now you have a safe place to sleep, but when you go out to your job, and a lot of these people are working or out looking for jobs, they know all their stuff's going to be there when they get back. That's huge. So they are secure, and the self-governance model works very well. These are exactly the conditions that are met in Seattle and Portland at shelters. Just exactly what our concerns are. We have they're being met now at these places. They have regular visits from the police, the fire marshal, the health department. There's no concerns there. They're sanitary. They're neat and tidy. I spoke with one of the guys in the Seattle Human Services Department. He sent me these documents that I shared. He said there has never been a history of violence at any of the tent cities in Seattle. Never. Not even one. Not even one incident. The residents themselves occasionally have had to call the police to remove someone who was violating the rules and jeopardizing the health and future of the residents. So they remove problem people on their own. The police don't have to do that. That's very rarely, but never initiated from outside. It's always internal. So, the idea, the intent, well, it would be transitional. It would be for parents with children. My view is that parents with children would be the most highly motivated group to not regard
Do you want another round,
a
George?
transitional situation like that as their forever home, and they would, jump. Yes, I think I'll have to have another round.
Claire?
So I haven't had a chance to read this document, but I'm glad to see it here, and I'm glad that it's reassured some of the other counselors. I did get a chance to meet yesterday with some of the folks from the R2D2 site up in Portland, and I was really moved and very impressed with the community that they created there in a pretty small physical space. And they've created not only a place of respite for people who might need a temporary place to sleep, but they're also creating community and opportunities for people to become empowered and reconnected with their humanity in a way that can allow them then to get the job they need and the security they need to move forward out of that location. So it is very impressive, and I think something that, based on the folks who I know are involved with Opportunity Village here, we could definitely recreate and make our own, as Eugene does. And I know, I did want to say, I know some folks out in the community feel like the council is moving too quickly in terms of looking at a list of potential sites. I know that caused some concern for folks. I would say, from my perspective, the council is moving with quite a lot of caution, and is going to be listening to folks in the different areas where we might be looking at a possible site. And it might be, and I don't want to speak for folks on the Opportunity Village Board, but there may even be a potential for some private sites as well. So it may not be all up to a city site, but I think that if the one thing Opportunity Village is asking of the city is a site, even if it's not for the long term, if that's the one thing we can give them, I think that's not asking very much of us in terms of the relief that this will bring, not only to the folks who would come to live there, but the rest of us who are impacted by folks who are homeless, who are living on our street in front of our house in their car. We have those folks in our community now, and being able to provide them a safe place to go and be part of a community and not so isolated in the places that they are now, I think is only a benefit to all of the folks in Eugene, not just the individuals who are part of that particular village. So those are my comments.
Matt?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. There is that working?
Go.
How about now?
Don't push the button down.
Don't push the button.
Don't push the button.
I'm not pushing.
There it is.
That one's live.
Terry, something that you said intrigued me, and that's that you thought you perceived an issue potentially down the road by using city-owned property as opposed to private property. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, the merit of private property is the flow-through liability for whatever happens is pretty clear. And so, and to be honest with you, I don't think the city is enormously rich in surplus properties. Otherwise, we would have heard about that over the last decade, that there's properties that we want to dispose of or allow for a secondary use. I know that we've looked at the Garfield site, and that's probably one of the higher priority sites, and probably would work. But I think that's also the public sector has a need for that property at some point. So, the need to make sure that you're using the public properties that we acquired or have for the purposes intended, I think is a long-term strategy. That's why I caveated that by saying, if indeed this is a good idea and we choose to move forward, even if it came up with private or public funds to acquire using block grant funds or something else like that, that would be an appropriate use for those funds to acquire the site that would be appropriate for it, to allow it to cease to be part of the public sector's domain. Remember that one of the problems also, and at least from my point of view, is that we recognize how stretched the city's staff and finances are already today. And I respect that, and I also expect that anything that is using public property is going to have some degree of more oversight than you would if you had private property. The public sector typically does not spend a lot of time on private property unless there's complaints. On public property, you really are mandated to do that.
Thank you, Terry. That clears it up quite a bit. So you perceive less of an issue on a shorter-term project because the issues wouldn't arise. But for a long-term project, private property. Now, the Northeast Sunderland property, that's private, is that correct?
Which one?
The Northeast Sunderland, that's the Dignity Village, I believe, is...
City property.
That's city property, adjacent to
That's
the...
city, Dignity Village on city property, R2D2's on private.
Okay, all right. Then the only thing I'll mention, then, is that you gave this to me a couple of weeks ago.
An earlier version.
An earlier version of it. You stressed that it was changing, that it was that it was dynamic in nature.
Yes.
And I want to congratulate you and all the people that put this together, because it looks like a very workable solution, potentially. And my main issue, not my main issue, but one of my main issues remains the surrounding neighborhoods and how are they affected. And Sarah, you and staff have done a good job of compiling a certain amount of data regarding that, but I will need to keep an eye on what is happening in the surrounding neighborhoods as we move forward with this. But excellent work on this, all of you that were involved.
I should just point out that the principal author for much of this, unfortunately, is not here. Is out of town, Andrew Heben, who has written a wonderful book called Tent City Urbanism, from his experience of visiting the various tent cities across the country, and a huge resource and very helpful to us in this whole process.
And I've not checked my inbox yet, but you said I might see a copy of that there at some point.
I meant to bring one for you tonight. I apologize, Councilor Farr. I have one for you on my desk.
I had an enjoyable but short time speaking with Andrew the other morning. But once again, good authorship on this. Well done.
I've got next round, George and Clara. Before that, I wanted to make mention of, had an email communication from one of our neighborhood leaders feeling that they were sort of not in the loop on this, and they happened to be one of the neighborhoods that had property on it that we are looking at. And so I'm going to just really strongly suggest, I know that we don't want to get people excited before we decide whether or not we're going to do it and where we're going to do it. But on the other hand, I don't think you can keep people from worrying or speculating or their fears emerging. So I think the more we bring people into the communication circle, the better we are. And I would actually advocate for us sort of bringing neighborhood leaders into the discussion in general, because it's something that we're doing as a city. having this conversation. So, the other thing that I just want to iterate, even though it's pretty darn obvious, is whatever we do, it will be it will be a piece. The need is huge, as all of you have so well spoken to, and if council decides to go to the village concept, that is an iterative process too in terms of meeting the needs in the community. I would not want the public to think that we think if we take this step that's going to solve the problems or needs of all the homeless people in our community. As you spoke to earlier, you've got people with special needs, you've got wet beds, you've got families, you've got a whole variety of people who need different kinds of responses, and so this will take us to a future conversation over some of the other proposals that came out for an ongoing commission to keep looking and moving the ball down the road. I just personally feel like all of us would feel a lot better about some of the situations that people in our community find themselves in if we felt like we were working on it all the time. You guys are, but I mean as a council and as a community, for us to just see this as part of our work year in and year out for the foreseeable future. George.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, you're absolutely right. The neighborhoods where potential sites are located definitely need to be in the conversation. I attended a meeting with parents at Chavez School this summer. There was pretty intense opposition. However, they had a poor understanding of what was on offer, and so we need to do more outreach to the neighborhoods to make sure that they have a real clear understanding of what actually is being on offer and how it will be completely different from anything that happened at the Washington Jefferson encampment last winter, which was totally unregulated and out of control. I mean, there were rules, but there was no possible way to enforce them. And there wasn't really 24-hour security. There were a lot of problems. What's being proposed is basically the complete opposite of that for parents with children. And we've heard from several of our speakers that the capacity for getting permanent housing for parents with children is nowhere near what we need. And we're falling behind. We're falling behind every year, and until the economy turns around, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know where that's going to be, when that's going to be. I think this is a very sensible solution. It's a pilot program. The idea is you start small. If it works, and I'm pretty sure it would work really well, then you discuss other sites, and you do distribute it around in the neighborhood, so no one place gets stuck with it, quote unquote. And it's not way out, zillions of miles from bus lines and schools, out in some industrial wasteland. It needs to be in town where people are and where the schools are, because it's going to be kids and parents. So, and close to the services and bus lines so they can get to the services. So, I'm a little, kind of impatient. It's taking so long, but I thought about it and I thought, no, it's probably better that we go slower, go over all the objections. But now I think it's time to educate ourselves about this and get moving and select a site and get the show on the road, because, middle of November, starting to get cold outside. Thanks.
Claire.
So I agree, we need to reassure any of the neighbors adjacent to any of the properties that we focus in on, and I'll be attending the Train Song neighborhood meeting this week, and that certainly would be one of the things to talk about, since that North Garfield site is right adjacent to Train Song. One thing I forgot to say in my prior comments with meeting with the folks from the Right to Dream 2 site is that site was established about 18 months ago, and they've had 0 calls for service to the police at that site. And they were sharing with me that they're actually located near 2 bars that are in downtown Portland, and that they actually patrol the block around their site and make sure that it's safe and deal with any kind of altercations there, and even have taken in people who were too drunk to get themselves home from the bar. So not necessarily homeless people, but people who were in some need, and they gave them a safe place to be. And the other thing that they noted, and I don't know what the plans would be for Opportunity Village, they let people bring their pets into the site, which is also a barrier for folks. And I asked them if they had any safety issues around that, and they said no, there had been no problems between pets or people with other people's pets. They just weren't allowed to leave their pet unattended at the site. So those are some points that I wanted to share.
Ellen?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Sorry I didn't get to meet with the R2D2 folks today. I was sick until the last 2 days and crawled out of bed for this. And
I'd be doing that.
So you might want to sterilize this and this after I'm done. I haven't fully read this either, but I've skimmed through it while we've been having this conversation, and it looks very good, and it looks very doable. And I applaud you all for putting in the effort to this, and all the people that have agreed to be on the board of directors, Dan, Carrie, Michael, Lauren, Robert, Andrew, Jean, and Brent. Thank you very much. That's excellent that you're willing to step up and do that. I agree with what Councilor Pryor said. This is not the same thing as the Occupy tent camp at Washington Jefferson. I'll say that again. This is not the same thing as the Occupy tent camp in Washington Jefferson. This is very, very different. It's a micro-housing proposal, and it has it's based on models that work extremely well that other people have commented on. And it's for families and children. So it will be a place that I think Eugene can look to as a model as we do this pilot. And I'm anxious to move forward with it and select a site or two. And no site will be without objection. It's just clear. And we need to work through the finalist sites with the neighbors carefully, but with dispatch. And I think this is one of those things that after it's done, people will say, what was the big deal about it? So I'm anxious to move forward. Thanks for all the work. I'm sorry I didn't get to meet with you today.
Thank you. Just one last question for clarification. The 129 North Garfield site was formerly a single-wide mobile home park, and we actually vacated that, I think, last time, years ago when I was on the City Council, in order to make room for expansion of the maintenance facility, which is still not being used. And interestingly, it would be kind of an interesting circle that we came on, that relatively low-income people were required to leave that site to begin with. They were relocated predominantly, at least that was the word that I heard, but it would be an interesting full circle to bring that back into a place where people who are struggling the hardest to have a place to live, a place to sleep, a place to get up refreshed in the morning. And the other question regarding that is that at one time, when I last visited that, it did have the single-wide mobile homes, and there were facilities such as sewage facilities. I think it was probably septic tank underneath there. Are those still in place?
I think we're planning on having in your packet this Thursday a background and history and context of each of the sites, so
I'll be patient.
There'll be some more information on when the site was acquired, why it was acquired, on all of the different sites, along with specifics around land use steps we'll need to go through, and also starting to just describe to you the context in which we'll have to make decisions. So, for example, we have staff exploring land use laws in Eugene and what land use things we have to comply with or change. Same with building code. Those things kind of, what the building code wants it to be called, the land use code doesn't want it to be called. And so we have a team that's really actively working on this to put together a pretty substantial document that you'll get on Thursday, and we would hope that you would get that so you'd have a little bit of time to read through it, formulate your questions before we come back and kind of dig into the sites a little deeper. So all of your questions should be answered.
And thank you for anticipating questions that I hadn't asked yet. But one of the questions that I haven't asked yet is regarding the number of spaces that were there. I'd like to have a refresher on that. I could dig through my old notes from 1996 or 1997, but if it's easier to come up with just to put it in the forefront of my mind how many dwellings were, I'll use the word displaced, at that point in time. Thank you.
So, as I think about this, you all make this move faster than I'm thinking it's going to move, but I've been hearing people talk about getting it done before winter comes, and I just want to be cautious about making that kind of comment, because I don't know how long it's going to take us to either narrow it down or go through a public engagement process to be sure that everybody, because it is true that no matter where we choose to, if you choose, to locate such a village, there will be people who have concerns about it, and we will have to take the time to go through and give people the chance to speak out and to listen and to try to respond. So there are certain things that no matter how much you wish, you cannot move them faster, because you will have to go back and clean it up if you don't do it right in the first place. So just wanted to not say slow down, but will say that it can't go faster than it can go. But any other comments from anybody? That, again, we want to thank, yes, Dan?
I just want to correct one impression, and I apologize that we had not done this earlier, because we have been talking about serving families, but in my conversation with my partners here and others, that's an open question. I mean, the target audience may not include families just because of difficulties in serving children. So I just don't want to give you that false impression that it's only going to be that, and I apologize I haven't shared that with some of you earlier, but we're still exploring that.
It could be couples, though, right?
Absolutely, couples. That's a huge need, is for couples. Yeah.
And I would trust that either through our own staff or through work that you all are doing, that we will get information on state policies and requirements around housing for homeless children and their families.
And that's all. It's just more work that has to be done, and maybe that won't be in the first, because it's a pilot project, might be something we would do later, but we are working on that.
Again, thank you all for being here. Thank you all for helping us this evening, and we have more work ahead, obviously, but we appreciate it very much. For people in the audience, we're going to break up now. We'll reconvene with our council meeting at 7:30. Thank you.
All right.